Good morning, and welcome to a brief discussion of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, passed by the House, and potential implications on global structuring in the asset management industry. I'm Thomas Groenen, Global Structuring Financial Services Leader. So, to start, whilst this is a key milestone in terms of enacting tax and reform measures that are key components of the Trump administration's objectives, it is important to keep in mind that the bill now moves to the Senate. The Senate is expected to take it up over the next week or two. It is possible that the Senate proposes considerable amendments to the bill, including to its tax proposals, or that the Senate introduces its own version of tax reform legislation as it did in 2017. As such, whilst it is important for asset managers and investors to start digesting and understanding impacts the bill may have, we need to also stay tuned to how developments play out in the Senate. From an international perspective, the bill generally provided welcome news, certainly with respect to GILTI and FDII, by broadly keeping the Section 250 deductions at their current levels with some slight modifications. It would reduce the deduction for GILTI to 49.2% from the current 50, but which would have otherwise been 37.5 next year by operation of the law, and 36.5 from the current 37.5, which would have otherwise been reduced to 21.875 next year by operation of the law for FDII. The bill also provides the beat rate to slightly increase to 10.1% from the current 10, as opposed to increasing it to 12.5, which would have been the case under current operation of the law. However, as discussed a bit later, there could be a 12.5% beat rate in certain cases. So turning now to the most significant change introduced by the bill in the global structuring context, the new proposed Section 899, the unfair foreign tax regime provision. This proposal would increase US net income, withholding, and gross basis tax rates on residents and governments that the bill defines as applicable persons of discriminatory foreign countries by up to 20 percentage points as compared to the applicable US statutory rate. It would also turn off the Section 892 exemption for foreign government investors. A discriminatory foreign country would generally include any foreign country other than any US possessions, such as Puerto Rico, that has unfair foreign taxes. Unfair foreign taxes consist of the UTPR under Pillar 2, digital service tax, and the diverted profits tax. As a result, it appears that countries that have enacted any of these taxes are to be treated as discriminatory foreign countries. This appears to include EU member countries, Canada, Australia, amongst others. It also includes any tax that is treated as discriminatory or extraterritorial under criteria enumerated in the bill, noting the bill also includes certain exceptions, such that VAT and GST regimes do not appear to be discriminatory or extraterritorial. The proposal instructs the Secretary of the Treasury to issue regulations or other guidance as needed to carry out the purposes of Section 899, including publishing a list on a quarterly basis listing the discriminatory foreign countries and to expand on the subjective criteria on what is a discriminatory or extraterritorial tax. Applicable persons include, amongst others, individuals, foreign governments as defined in Section 892, and corporations resident in discriminatory foreign countries, except if such corporations are majority owned by US persons. It also includes corporations resident in another country, but are majority owned by residents in discriminatory foreign countries. Mechanically, if Section 899 were to apply, US tax rates applicable to payments and income earned by applicable persons would gradually increase by 5 percentage points each year until the applicable rate consists of the otherwise applicable US statutory rate plus 20 percentage points. So, for example, assuming no treaty rate otherwise applies, US source dividends paid to a foreign individual resident in a discriminatory foreign country would be subject to 35% US tax in the first year Section 899 applies. So while Section 899 is not expected to provide for a blanket override of existing US income tax treaties, it is expected to apply on reduced treaty rates. In other words, if the treaty provides for a 5% rate on dividends and the dividends are paid to an applicable person, such rate is expected to increase from 5 to 10% in the first year of application, with the rate increasing by 5% in 5% increments in subsequent years. Lastly, one final point on the impact of Section 899. The provision also provides for an override of the relevant BEAT thresholds for those entities that are greater than 50% owned by applicable persons. In this case, BEAT at a rate of 12.5% would apply irrespective of whether the entity meets the thresholds. What's not clear from reading the statutory language in welcome news, the House Budget Committee helpfully has clarified in its report that the bill, in the bill, that Section 899 would not apply to the portfolio interest exemption with respect to FDAP interest. However, as I noted, the bill appears to apply to all treaty provisions, including where the applicable treaty provision would provide for a reduced zero rate of tax. There are also various unresolved questions, including how Section 899 would apply in the context of hybrid entities. For example, in the case of US treaty claiming foreign companies resident in a discriminatory foreign country, but that are checked open for US tax purposes, and how majority US companies, which appears to turn off Section 899, would be defined and applied in practice. So why is this provision so significant, and what do fund managers need to be thinking about? Section 899 imposes significant tax on the US income of individuals and entities resident in discriminatory foreign countries. This could materially impact the after-tax returns of such investors and could therefore shift how certain investors view investments in US-focused funds. Fund managers should be evaluating the potential impact across structures and investors, including US blocker structures and the impact of Section 899 on distributions, interests that would not otherwise qualify for PI from such blockers to applicable persons, as well as potential application of BEAT depending on ownership of the blocker by a majority of applicable persons. BEAT could result in incremental blocker level cash tax leakage. Offshore blockers. There, consideration should be given if the offshore blockers would be subject to Section 899, and that will depend on their ultimate ownership composition, even if the blocker itself is not resident in the discriminatory foreign country, think Cayman. Credit fund managers may be considerably impacted depending on their respective structures. Credit managers would need to assess impacts, including on levered blockers, as noted, and treaty-based structures, including fund of one and bring your own treaty structures. Real estate and infrastructure managers also need to consider the impact of Section 899. Section 899 would generally apply to FIRPTA, and as I noted, Section 892 would be turned off for foreign government investors resident in discriminatory foreign countries. As such, this could impact a number of REIT and inbound real estate structures commonly used. As with any legislative measure, there is a lot to digest here. Fund managers and investors should assess potential impacts while staying tuned to legislative developments in the Senate. Thank you for tuning in. We will continue to monitor the developments as the Senate considers the bill, and in particular, keen to see whether Section 899 will get enacted into law as currently drafted.